So for those who don't know me, I'm Justin Anthony, Senator Lee's Business Outreach Director. I'll introduce the rest of our team here in 1 second, but just wanted to thank you all for jumping on the phone today. I realize the past week, 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks have kind of been phone call to email back to phone call. So really appreciate you all taking time to jump on this phone call. With phase 3 passing the Senate on Wednesday, we thought this call would certainly be helpful to you all as you represent a lot of communities, a lot of businesses, can certainly help us get this information far and wide. Hopefully you all received the email with the one-pagers. There are 3 one-pagers for phase 3 and 2 one-pagers for phase 2. If you have not received those, go ahead and just send me a chat message. And I'll go ahead and email them to you here during the call. To introduce our team, we have myself and then Robert Axon, Senator Lee's State Director, is on the call. We have Christy Woodruff, who is Senator Lee's Legislative Director. We have Brecken Denler, who works on our economic team. See who I'm scrolling down the list, so bear with me. Carolyn Phippen, who's here on our state team and serves as our liaison between elected officials in our office. We have Dominic Restucia, who does a lot of the military work for Senator Lee. Heath Hansen, our Southern Utah director. Isaac Easton, who also does a lot of our public lands, energy, and natural resource work. Joel Wellham, who's on the commerce staff. Catherine Thompson, who's on the commerce staff. Mimi Teixeira, who is certainly busy along with Caitlin doing our health portfolio. And who am I missing, if anyone? Oh, John Shelton, who's also on our money team. So if I missed anybody, I apologize, but we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Christy, our LD, and her team. Let them kind of run through phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of the congressional response to COVID-19. Then we'll go ahead and open it up to questions. If you have a question, I'm going to mute everybody on this end just so that there's no kickback. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat to me and go ahead and make sure those get addressed. So Christy, if you want to take it away.
Great. And I will try to be brief in my summary of the first 3 phases of the federal government's response to the coronavirus, and so that we can spend more time on specific questions that you all have. Please bear with us. We have read the bills. There are still a lot of missing pieces of how it's all going to interact. So some of the questions that you guys will ask, we will have to follow up with answers. But again, we want to be there and responsive to the needs of you guys so that we can make these bills work and produce the things that you all need back home in the state. So really quick, phase 1 was an emergency funding spending bill. It was roughly about $8 billion that was appropriated for the first stage of the response. Phase 2 is probably where, particularly the small businesses and large businesses started to really focus in as this started to create some more mandates on businesses. I will say before I go into those parts, this bill also had an additional pot of money for emergency funding. It included waivers for nutrition programs and SNAP programs. It had an additional $1 billion for states' unemployment insurance programs. And then it had a number of healthcare provisions related to the coverage of testing of COVID-19, various different medical equipment, etc. But the heart of what you guys probably all want to hear about are the impacts that it had on small and mid-sized businesses, mostly businesses that had 500 employees or fewer. First, it had included that these small businesses during 2020 had to provide 80 hours or basically 10 days worth of emergency paid sick leave. This was to care for if they themselves had caught coronavirus or somebody in their family had to, or they didn't have child care services available. This first 10 days or 80 hours was to be covered at 100% of wage replacement. It then also included a protected 12 weeks of FMLA leave. So this is not in addition to the first 10 days. It's probably best to talk about it as the next 10 weeks after the first 2 weeks that were provided under the emergency paid leave. So these next 10 weeks were for those workers that didn't have, who had children whose school was closed or didn't have any sort of child care provider available. Those 10 weeks would be replaced at 2/3 of the normal wages. To reimburse for the small and mid-sized businesses that were mandated to make these payments, the federal government would be providing a refundable tax credit to cover all of those expenses. Now I'll jump quickly into phase 3. First, I'm going to talk about phase 3, a component that was really directed towards individual Americans and American families. There were what are called recovery rebates. And I apologize. I think my dog saw something outside. Hold on one second. Okay, I think we're good. So these recovery rebates were a $1,200 payment for each individual. And if you were making less than $75,000 or $150,000 jointly, you qualified for all $1,200, and then it started to phase out above the $75,000. There was also an additional $500 per child. Then there was also, we beefed up what the federal government is now calling pandemic unemployment insurance. This not only expanded the number of weeks of unemployment insurance available, but also provided an additional $600 per week that would be covered by the federal government. There were also some additional flexibility provisions that were included, specifically on being able to tap retirement funds without penalty. Then the bill also included another $350 billion worth of emergency funding. We're still kind of going through all of the specifics of that, but it is our understanding that roughly 80% of that would be going directly to state and local governments and funds that could be tapped and used. There was also a coronavirus relief fund that had $150 billion that would be divvied up for the 50 states, the territories, and the DC. We think Utah will roughly qualify for about $1.3 billion of that fund, and that should be distributed within the next 30 days or so. Again, this bill had a number of healthcare provisions, and if you have any questions about specific ones, we'd be happy to talk to you about those. And then finally, I'll touch on the two big kind of loan programs that phase 3 had. The first one was for the small and mid-sized businesses under 500 employees again. There was $350 billion given to SBA for what they're calling a paycheck protection program. The loan would be the size of 2.5 times the business's average monthly payroll from 2019, or $10 million, whichever is less. These loans would be interest-free for the first year, and then be able to charge up to 4% interest rate after that first year. One thing to note of this loan, it could be used towards payroll, rent, mortgage, interest, utilities, etc. And the payment that was used for payroll, all of those uses except for interest on pre-existing debt, could be forgiven by the federal government as long as the business maintained kind of their employment status and continued to compensate their employees making under $100,000 at or above 75% of their normal wages. It also had some tax deferment for small businesses included. And then I will also now quickly touch on another program or pot of money. This one was $500 billion. I'm trying to do this math. 46 billion was specified for particular programs. This was particularly for kind of airlines and businesses that had a national security interest. But then the remaining $454 billion was is eligible to be dispersed for mid and large size businesses. So think those with 500 to 10,000 employees. I will note there are a number of conditions that the businesses must meet to access this roughly $450 billion pot of money for loans. And those are all, or the vast majority of them have been listed on our one sheet. I won't go through all of the conditions that must be met by the businesses for that. So I think that that's a pretty quick, high-level summary of phases 1 through 3. And so I'll turn it back over to Justin.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. Looks like we have a question coming in from Senator Collimore, so let me go ahead and find his name and prove that I am not good with technology. Unmute him so he can ask his question.
Here, I've unmuted. Perfect. I think John Shelton actually answered my question. So business mortgages do not count towards the pre-existing debt as far as the forgiveness program. So thank you.
What other questions do everyone have for us? So a preface of like Christy had said, we're happy to answer any questions we can or take questions and get answers from the agencies or do some further research into the bill to find you all answers.
I'm confused because some people talk about title and some people talk about phase. Are the titles 1, 2, and 3 the same as phase 1, 2, and 3?
Go ahead. I can go ahead and take that. So when I'm talking about the phases 1, 2, 3, those were individual bills. Each of the bills also have multiple titles and divisions within them. So when I'm talking about the phases, those are 3 different bills that were passed on 3 different days.
I guess I should also identify myself. I'm Tulinda Larson, and I'm the new executive director of UAMI, which is the Utah Advanced Materials Manufacturing Institute. So we are predominantly small businesses that have taken technology out of the lab and now have commercialized it. Very small companies, less than 50. So this is very good news. Of course, we are watching the House debate it. So what do you think is the timing for actual implementation and these small businesses being able to access these resources?
So a lot of that is a bit uncertain. We have been in touch with folks from Treasury, Department of Labor, Small Business Administration, etc. Their hope and goal is that this will all be accessible and implemented within the first couple weeks. But, again, I think that is yet to be determined exactly when it all will be up and functioning. I don't know if anybody from, bear with us, we call each of our teams have kind of different titles, but if anybody from Team Money or Team Help have any specific intel from any of the federal agencies on implementation deadlines, please feel free to voice them.
Looks like we have a question from Dave Davis.
Hey, Justin and Christy. It looks like on the Paycheck Protection Program provisions, there is a break point at 100,000 So where it basically says, look, if you cannot cut pay for someone under $100,000 of compensation by more than 25%. It kind of leaves open the idea, does that mean that you can have your executives that are over $100,000 and you could ask them to take a pay cut greater than 25,000? And is that bounded by $75,000 on the bottom end?
I can start to answer some of that. I think that's exactly the intention of that provision. I don't know about the lower boundedness of it, how that would apply. We can follow up with the SBA or the Small Business Committee and try and find out the answer to that for you.
Yeah, that would be really good to know whether or not, I mean, I guess it makes a little bit of sense to say, look, even if you're going to cut an executive's pay, that it would be bounded by that 25% rule once you hit $100,000.
Yeah, I imagine that would be the case at that point, but I can follow up and email you about that.
Thank you.
Perfect. Looks like we have a question from Ricky from the Utah Petroleum Association as well. Ricky, can you hear us?
Can you unmute her, Justin?
I think
Yeah,
I unmuted.
I think I just did it. Sorry, Ricky.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, good. So my question was, we have heard that you can't double dip between these various loan programs, and that if you have already started the process for the SBA disaster loans, for example, that you might not be able to take advantage of new programs coming out. Is that the case? And for individuals that may have acted early on the disaster loan side, what should they do if they would rather switch to some of these new alternatives coming out?
John, can you go ahead and try to take that one again?
Yeah, so there's a couple provisions in the SBA portion of the bill that would say that if you already have a loan, you have all these enhanced conditions on it. So you don't have to pay on principal. The SBA will basically make payments for you on an already existing SBA loan for principal, interest, and fees for 6 months. So I think the rationale of preventing double dipping was because you get these enhanced.
I didn't have a copy either. What the crap? No, they just sent it to me.
John, are you still there?
Yeah.
Go ahead, continue.
Yeah. So does that begin to answer the question? Because they're enhancing the terms for the already existing loans, they don't want people then to be able to take out additional loans on top of that.
If you would like to share with us a little bit more of the specifics on the loans that have already been sought after, either follow up in an email or we can jump on a different call, we'd be happy to place a call with SBA or the committee to sift through exactly the details, particularly if you haven't been approved for that loan and you want to switch, if there's any sort of mechanism to make that a smooth, easy transition versus having to fill out all the paperwork and process again. So we're happy to look further into that for you.
Thanks.
Hey, Justin, I think if you guys, Christy, if you guys can get that to us, I think that'll be very helpful, because I think before we knew what was coming out in terms of the CARE Act, a lot of our companies, when they saw the SBA stuff, just immediately jumped, we got to do something. And so if there is an option for them to look at what is the best potential fit for them and they can switch back and forth, getting that information out to them will be very, very critical. So anything you could send us would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right.
What other questions can we answer for everyone, or even questions that you've been hearing from your members or even feedback that you've been hearing from your members on things that are being circulated with phase 2, phase 3, and even phase 1.
So I'll bring up a question if I can. There is what seems to be conflicting provisions as it pertains to moratorium on evictions. And I represent 80, 90+% of all the residential property management companies in the state. And the question is that in one section of this, the new act, it suggests that if you are Freddie or Fannie backed and you take a forbearance, then you have to do a moratorium on evictions. The next section, though, says that it suggests that the moratorium is applicable to everybody. And that's sending a crazy message. And we've already seen wild reactions to this of tenants thinking that they are not subject to eviction for 120 days now. And so I'm wondering which applies. We've got some people saying that if we don't take the forbearance, that doesn't apply to us, and some are concerned that it's applicable to everybody, regardless of the impact of COVID on their personal circumstance.
I suspect we don't have an answer for that, but does anybody from Team Money know how to answer that? I think we're going to have to get back to you on that one. So let us take a closer look at the legislation and also reach out to, I'm not even sure who we'll reach out to, but we'll figure out who we need to reach out to them and reach out to them.
If I could
just so you know, probably 70% of all apartment communities in the state have Freddie or Fannie backed mortgages.
Yep.
And so this has wide applicability.
Yeah, and Senator Collimore, if I can just add, we've had a number of folks beyond even just you asking this very question, and so we definitely want to get an answer. And just like the question posed before from Todd and from Ricky, we'll look and figure out the answer to that, and then send that out far and wide so that people have the correct information and know how to proceed.
Awesome, thank you.
Here's a question that I'd love to pose to all of you here in Utah, where you have Senator Lee's legislative team on the phone right now. And as sadly is not a surprise, there's already discussions about subsequent phases and other things that could be coming down here in the future. What are some ideas that you guys have of key things that that our team can look at to avoid? And what are some of these problems maybe that you've heard within your association groups or your national organizations that you think could be extremely problematic for Utah and for your industry? That's something that the earlier we get started at addressing that, the more important it can be, and the more kind of resources we would have at our disposal to make sure that if the government is going to do something, we try to make it as I guess, effective and efficient and appropriate as possible.
Justin, this is Todd. From a manufacturing perspective, I think one of the things that we know we're going to see, but could be exacerbated by shutdowns or shelter in place here specifically in Utah, is that when we ramp back up coming out of the pandemic, the supply chain is going to need to be very nimble, and we're going to have a huge pressure on the supply chain, because there are a lot of folks that are going to weather this storm. There are also companies who may not weather it so well, and so the typical supply chain coordination on everything is going to be disrupted. So we're working with our national organization and the National Institute of Standards Technology, NIST, and MEP to try and talk about how we fortify the supply chain right now, and that we do use some tools that are here in Utah. UAMI has the Connects piece that actually we started as UMA and then took to our national organization to try and connect supply chain together. So we need to make sure that in this whole process, that when those manufacturers come back out, the products that they've been manufacturing for generations, their supply chain partners are either still there or they have access to others, which if we don't, it's going to seriously disrupt the ability to ramp back up. And that could be everything that ties from ag to food, to retail, to consumer products, everything. So specifically those that may not be included in a CISA government document that would remain essential that might shut down. So just some food for thought for you guys as you're talking with people. That's something we're definitely think we're going to see.
Hey, Todd, real quick on that. Are you already seeing some disruptions with some of the shelter-in-place guidance that's been issued for states across the country so far?
Absolutely. I think you have to remember that sometimes we think, well, it's shelter-in-place in Pennsylvania or it's a shelter-in-place in New York, and we're here in Utah. If you just go back a week and take California, Pennsylvania, New York, a company like L3 Harris, their head corporations where they're tied to are both San Francisco and New York. And so the trickle effect down to those folks has been massive. And it's supply chain. I heard from Fetzer this morning that Fetzer's having a hard time getting milled products. And they're running through what they have in the process. So yeah, the interesting part is that the global supply chain from Asia and Europe has started to ramp back up. But now here in the U.S., with the lag behind on the pandemic, a lot of our companies are ready. Their pipeline is full, their supply chain is full, but they can't necessarily ramp back up because they're trying to be careful and take 50% of their production offline, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the unintended consequences that folks are trying to figure out how to work around. But that is good news that worldwide components and pieces and parts are ramping back up. It's just a question of how long it will take us to not be in a shelter in place to continue to roll with it. So
it looks like Linda Larson had a comment on that as well.
Yes, thank you. Again, thanks for the shout out to UAMI's Connect supply chain tool. We're finding that, again, ours are very small companies, exactly what we were saying just now, that their delivery, their customer was in Europe. And so now they've got a backlog because they weren't able to get it to Europe. But they are able to keep some of the production line going with observing all of the social distancing. But starting on April 1st, the UAMI team is going to be reaching out to our 137 small businesses for one-on-one calls and working through a questionnaire. So I'll be happy to share that with Senator Lee's office and anyone else on the call.
Yeah, please do.
And Justin, if I can add something to that for you, Todd, and anybody else on here. Something to keep in mind, like let's say you run into a key issue for one of your members or one of your businesses where they're unable to get a product through a state that has a shelter-in-place order or some other logistical challenge. We of course can't guarantee that we can fix that situation, but certainly it doesn't hurt to use us as an avenue to try to find a resolution. We have a company that we're working on behalf of that has some product that is stuck in Ohio right now. Because of some actions and shelter-in-place directives that they're getting there in Ohio. And so again, we might not be able to solve it, but we are happy to leverage the relationships that Senator Lee has, that our staff has, to see if there's places that can be alleviated and certain encouragements that can occur. That obviously, in this situation that we're dealing with, the more critical the component is or the product is for things that are absolutely essential to society. So food delivery, any national defense issues, medical equipment. those of course would be the easier ones for us to deal with. But even if it's just a product that's keeping one of your members in business, that still is important for us. It's important for that business and that community and their employees. So please, even if it's not one of those critical need issues, let us know. We'd be happy to see what we can do.
It looks like we have a question from Dan from the Salt Lake Chamber as well.
Hi. Hey, I was just wondering, a lot of businesses feel like if they don't apply for a disaster loan or one of these other loans instantly, they'll be left out. So they're making some pretty quick decisions. Is there enough to go around for those who need it? Or can they sit back for a second and figure out what the best route is going to be?
I can probably take this one. So there's Small Business Administration says there's something like 30 million small businesses in the United States, and the maximum that you can take out on these different loans is 10 million. So not everyone's going to be eligible to take out 10 million, but say all 30 plus million businesses took out 100,000. That would more than account for all of the money that we've appropriated for the small business provisions. And the definition of small business in the last bill that's in the House right now is being considered for passage. It expanded the definition of small businesses. So I do imagine that that's not going to be enough for everybody for the year. Assuming that a large number of qualifying businesses will try and take advantage of these.
With that being said, we certainly aren't trying to panic you. It really is almost impossible for us to know, but it's a concern that we had also in reviewing this bill of businesses that I don't want to say the larger businesses, but the businesses that do have a CFO that have the capabilities to look through this and get in the queue faster than maybe the smaller guys, maybe at an advantage, and that the money may dry up faster than they can get to it. But we simply just, as John pointed out, we really just don't know until we know the size and the extent of the problem and how much the businesses are looking for and asking for. But that would be something that we would really appreciate you guys keeping us posted on as you start to access, as your members and your companies start to try to access the SBA loans. If there comes a time when they are turning you away because there's just no more money.
And just to add to that real quick on the SBA bandwidth side, we've been working a lot with the state office as well as the regional office in Denver on getting the state, the entire state and all 29 counties within the state eligible. But then in addition to that, talking with them about their bandwidth. So in the state right now, they have 2 loan specialists. There's obviously several more at the regional office, but still you can see if this many businesses are applying for loans, there is a time that it takes for them to get through those. The other side to that too, we've received a few questions regarding their website. With the sheer amount of businesses and individuals that are accessing their website, it has crashed a few times. If for whatever reason you go on or a business goes on and their website is not live, check back in literally 30 minutes or an hour, and typically they've been able to fix it pretty quick. But if you're getting kind of continuously getting that message of error or error has occurred, feel free to send me an email. We have a great relationship with both the state and the regional office. More than happy to flag that for them. They've been incredibly responsive to the needs of our office, but then also the small businesses here.
I've got a question, and sorry, I know I joined late, so if it's been covered, then don't answer, and I'll just follow up afterwards. But on the mid-sized company program. Some of our clients are saying, you know, it looks fantastic. We like the look of it. We know that the banks will be administering it. However, do we know? I mean, well, the banks. I know their interest rate is capped. What they can do. Do we know though if the banks might ask for collateral or other covenants or other types of protections? Other is it? I mean, on the face of it, it looks really great. Like it's something that companies that already have, existing credit facilities could sort of layer this in alongside and not get in the way of it. But if the banks though take it upon themselves to ask for certain types of collateral to do this or that, then it really won't be very effective. So I'm just curious if anyone knows, what the how that's going to play out. Thank you.
John, could you maybe try to answer that one again?
Yeah, so they're not, the banks aren't allowed to assign fees on top of any of this. So the bills it's written provides for it's heavily incentivized banks to take on these loans, to issue these loans. We're covering the kind of approval fees. We're covering everything for them. They're 100% guaranteed as well. So there's, so far as I can see it, there's not any reason why a bank wouldn't want to issue these. And part of the bill is also expedite the process to bring in more lenders, more banks, more credit unions.
Is that for the loans for the large, like for the 500 to 10,000 employee companies? Do those does it apply to those as well? Do you know?
Joel, could you actually go ahead and take that part of the question?
Sure. Hey, Troy. So I think the way that the Title IV, the large businesses was organized was Congress spoke to collateral requirements for the airlines. They left the rest of the provisions for collateral warranties, all of the terms and conditions for receiving these loans up to Treasury. So Treasury has to publish the guidance within 10 days of enactment. So it's unclear as to all of the specific details. But I would imagine all of that's going to be specified in the forthcoming guidance from Treasury.
As we get that guidance, we're happy to pass that along to you guys for the larger loans that are going to come from the Federal Reserve's $450 billion pot.
Hey,
John, can you expand a little bit more on the expanding of the lender network? I know that there's a traditional SBA lending network, and it sounds like this is going to expand beyond that as far as access to lenders. Can you give us any more detail on how that's going to expand and who's going to be involved in that expanded network?
John?
Yeah, so the bill is written, doesn't give many details about what that will look like. That'll be up to Treasury, I think, to make determinations. So as we get more information, I can pass that on. But the bill basically, the text is something like Treasury should be working as hard as it can to get as many more lenders to issue these loans as possible. It's pretty open-ended.
As we get more information from SBA and Treasury on that, we're happy to share. And if you guys are seeing having any issues of finding an available lender, please pass that along, because that would definitely be something that we would want to share with SBA and Treasury, that the guidance of not only having the existing network, but expanding it is actually not happening. So please keep us posted.
Can I ask a question about that, the 450, the Fed program, $450 billion program? So does it specify in the legislation what types of businesses will be what types of businesses will be eligible for those loans? Because I had read in the media that at certain points during the negotiation that, this would sort of be a first come, first serve, anybody that's eligible under the guidance that's put out there by the Treasury Secretary would be eligible, and then at other times that the Treasury Secretary would actually have discretion to sort of decide which industries were going to be eligible for those loans. Do you have any information on that?
I think that's going to be coming in the guidance, but Joel, do you have any additional? details to share?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of the Fed's $454 billion, the eligibility, they define a United States business, a U.S. business. The first rule is that if you've taken any of the money under an SBA loan, you're not eligible for the $454 billion. U.S. business, and you're seeing the definition all goes to they have to be incorporated or organized or created under the laws of the United States, or you have to have a majority of your employees in the working within the United States as well. That is kind of broad. It's kind of broad in that sort of a definition there. In terms of specific businesses or specific industries, as you probably saw from the press, the pot of money is $500 billion. A portion of it is going to designate for the air carriers, for airlines, for passenger air carriers, some for the cargo airlines, and then some of it for $17 billion is for national security companies. The remaining $454 billion is not specified for industry, so it will come at the discretion of the Treasury Secretary to be able to dole that out for particular industries or for particular companies. That's all going to come, I think, as Christy said, in those terms and conditions that come forward. But I will say that the remaining guidance that's currently been set forth by Congress is those additional conditions for if you have employees between 500 and 10,000, those do give particular conditions that are specified in the statute. And I know the one pager has a list of all of those conditions that you have to do, but industry specific, no.
Well, one thing that's a concern, so I represent the mining industry in Utah, and I mean, in many cases, the financial market, lenders are not as willing to provide assistance for those of us that are in the extractive industries because we're somehow politically unfavorable. And so I would just hope that whatever the Treasury does, that they don't sort of pick winners and losers amongst the various industries, because we have a lot of companies that are too large to take advantage of the SBA programs, but at the same time, they're very capital intensive and they really need to conserve their cash or have additional assistance at this time to keep operating. And so again, we're just hopeful that we won't see any sort of, again, the Treasury picking winners and losers amongst, industries that may or may not be considered to be politically acceptable these days.
Certainly. I think that's a very legitimate concern. And then as well as the particular conditions that companies have to comply with in order to receive these loans as well.
Joel, on that, while we're on that, my sense is that, I really don't know, but just from looking at legislation and because there's a lot, obviously there's so much discretion in Treasury's hands in terms of how they prioritize, going right to Brian's question. Is it safe to assume, though, that just based on the whole purpose of the bill, that they'll be prioritizing, I think, it'll be a job, prioritizing loans in order to preserve jobs. So if they can spend $1, with one of the mining companies, and that $1 will keep 5 people employed versus spending it, I'm trying to think of an industry that, that doesn't impact Utah at all, well, I don't know. I can't think of them. The cruise lines, and and that only keeps half that many people employed. Do you think that's the priority, or I guess we just don't have any way of knowing? I'm trying to think how to advise clients how they should, because right now clients are already thinking about how they should pitch themselves, and usually you want to tell your investors we're super profitable, we're a great company. That's not actually what you want to be doing now, because you want to show that you need the money, but you also want to show that it's gonna, I assume that the thing you want to show is that it's gonna keep a lot of people employed. Anyway, I'll shut up.
Yeah, no, as I said, it doesn't go to the specifics of prioritizing particular industries. What you have to do with the U.S. is you have to be a U.S. business, as it's defined in the bill. And then you have to demonstrate that due to COVID, you've incurred operating losses, and the purpose of the money is to go towards your operating expenses. So to pay employees. The conditions obviously are things like you can't do stock buybacks, you can't do dividends to your shareholders, a number of other things with organized labor as well in order to receive those loans. But generally, it's meant the discretion is at the Treasury Secretary to give money to folks who are incurring losses due to COVID, and it's as broad as that.
Any other questions that we can answer for anyone while we're on this call? Alrighty, hearing none. Christy and Rob, do either of you have any closing thoughts before we sign off here?
Yeah, let me just say and stress, as any of you here in Utah can see, you have a wealth of knowledge here within the team, from our DC-based legislative folks to our Utah-based folks. And even when maybe you don't know the answer, I can speak for myself really on this, and Dave Davis can attest, I often don't know what I'm talking about, but I usually know somebody who does. And so even in those scenarios, as you're running into questions, as you're running into issues, as you're running into ideas and opportunities, please let us know. I would much rather hear from a number of you than not hear from any of you. And don't assume that we have the answers or know the questions that need to be asked. So engage with us. We're always happy to bring our whole team together, or the relevant folks to help engage on this. This same type of video format, we're happy to do this again if it would be helpful moving forward at different stages of implementation. We can have one-off calls. So really anything that would be of value to you, your members, the businesses that you represent, please let us know. We can even do a one-off call specifically with your organization if that's helpful. So really just think through everything that you need, and we want to be a part of helping you get that.
And the only thing I will say is, I know most of you guys do have a contact with the DC team. Do not feel like you have to find a particular person. The senator has told us to make this a priority. This is a national emergency. So we've, as Justin was listing off the DC team, we've got our military people on the line. We've got our lands people on the line. We've got our energy people on the line. We've got our healthcare team on the line. We've got our economics experts. Like, we're all looped in on reviewing these things and sharing constantly what intel we're getting from the various different administrations and questions that we're hearing back from the state. So if you don't have my contact information, or you don't have, John's or Mimi's or Caitlin's, that's okay. Email the person that you do know. We'll get it, and one of us will absolutely respond to you.
Yeah, and on that note too, please do not hesitate to reach out on questions, especially as you hear from your members in the coming days. I'm sure, assuming the House passes this today, I'm sure there's going to be an influx of questions this weekend, and certainly into the early part of this week. Please don't hesitate to send them my way. Always happy to get them to the legislative team, answer what I can, and then also make sure that you all are getting connected with local, state, and local resources here. So, but other than that, again, appreciate you all jumping on the call. Again, I realize it's been phone call to email to phone call for the past 3 weeks. So no time is valuable, and really appreciate you guys all jumping on.
So much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.